Alright, tier list time. People have been asking me to do this for, I don't know, what feels like years. These are my most difficult platinum trophies I've ever earned, ranked from least difficult to most difficult in tier list format. Let's do it. Obviously, I have platinumed every game I'm about to rank on this tier list, and I have a video for almost every single one of these games. So if any of these games sound interesting, you can check for links for the videos in the description for the corresponding game. So as you may have noticed, I've included all of the Dark Souls games. I included these games on this list because it just seemed like the thing to do, especially because so much of the modern day difficulty in video games is defined or has evolved from these games and the experience people have with them. I feel like the FromSoft games was when gamers really started recognizing difficult games, even though they were being done long before that. And there are much harder games out there than these ones. But for some reason, the FromSoft games is when difficulty became mainstream, so it just felt right to include these on the list. Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Bloodborne. I'm putting all of these games in the overrated category. A lot of people look at the Souls games' reputation and immediately become intimidated or frightened. But if we're looking at this strictly from a trophy hunting point of view, there are so many ways to make these games so much easier on yourself. The number one biggest thing is co-op. You could still play multiplayer in all of these games, and all of their online servers are still up, and the online still works. You could play all of these games alongside a friend, and playing with a friend just breaks these games. Especially if you're fighting bosses. And even the most difficult bosses can be made to look like a joke. You and a friend could absolutely demolish these games, and I'm very confident of that. Granted, the elitist scum will judge you for that if you decide to play multiplayer or use spellcasting or even get help from NPCs. And there are degenerate pieces of shit out there who will tell you that you should feel bad for doing that. But I'm here to take it from me, Godlike Matt. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. You having fun and having a good time is more important than the way anybody thinks you should be experiencing these games. There is no rule of law here. There is no true way to experience a game. If it can be done in a game, fucking do it. So to anybody who's in fear of being judged, don't worry, you have my seal of approval. Alright, let's throw up a personal interesting one. The guy who posted a guide on PSNP for this game gave it a 9 out of 10. That is massive! If this guy thinks Dead Space 2 is a 9 out of 10, I'd be really interested to see what difficult games this guy's played throughout his life. Because Dead Space 2 is not a 9 out of 10 difficulty. Now, the reason this game's platinum is considered so difficult is mainly due to one trophy. This trophy requires you to complete the game on hardcore mode. And the reason why this is so difficult is that you must start fresh. Hardcore cannot be done on New Game Plus. Enemies are harder to kill and deal more damage on this difficulty. You can only save your game 3 times in total throughout the entire playthrough. This is the big one. And this trophy is exactly what stops people from earning this platinum. Now, what started out as something that was a bit of a frustrating challenge for me in the beginning ended up being a thrilling experience and a very rewarding one at that. Just because I love this game so much, and I just would have so much fun playing it, and the more I would play the game, the more I would learn about it. I would figure out which guns were OP as shit when fully upgraded, and the better I became at the game and the more knowledgeable I became, the game just got easier. And even though I was limited to only 3 saves, knowledge is power. Knowing where enemy spawns are before you enter fights is extremely helpful, allowing you to prepare for battles more easily. Just being passionate about the game makes the game easier. And obviously not everyone's gonna feel that way that plays the game, and it sucks for those people because they're probably gonna have a much harder time because of that. But Dead Space 2 is genuinely one of the best survival horror games I've ever played. And so for me, it was just way more fun than challenging. And so for that reason, I'm going to be ranking Dead Space 2 in the not as bad as you would think category. Yeah, no way, fuck, Dead Space 2 is a 9 out of 10, I'm sorry. And on that note, let's start ranking the very similar games to Dead Space 2. Next up, we'll talk about Silent Hill 2. This is the remastered version of the original game, and not the remake that came out recently, so keep that in mind. Now, the guy who made a guide on PSNP for this game gave it an 8 out of 10 difficulty. Now, the reason this game is considered such a high difficulty rating is because of this trophy right here, acquiring the green hyper spray. In order to do this, we'll have to complete a playthrough of Silent Hill 2 while having earned a 10-star rating by the end of the game. You have to play the game on the hardest difficulty, while also having the puzzle difficulty set to the hardest, and some of the puzzles in this game have randomized solutions, meaning you can't just memorize the answer and expect to fly through the puzzle. You'll have to actually solve it on the fly, because the answer always changes each playthrough. You have to have gotten all of the endings. You can only save twice throughout the entire game. You have to beat the game in under 3 hours. You have to collect 150 items or more, plus the 8 special items in the game, although this is probably the easiest requirement on the list. You could do this without even really trying. Kill 75 enemies in the playthrough by fighting. This is extremely easy. You're already doing this naturally all the time. Killing 75 enemies by shooting, however, is much more annoying. This takes a lot of fucking ammo, and this is actually one of the most time-consuming things to do in the playthrough. You'll have to beat the boat stage in under 80 seconds. That requirement was nowhere near as difficult as I once believed. And another one of the tricky stipulations is to beat the game while having taken less than 500 points of damage. This is also nerve-wracking because your health is not depicted by an actual value, and you'll most likely be paranoid the entire playthrough, wondering if you fucked up that requirement because there's no way to keep track of how much health you've lost. Now, do I agree with this game being an 8 out of 10? No. For the exact same reasons that I stated about Dead Space 2. This is once again very much a game where knowledge is power. And the thing about this game is that 6 playthroughs are mandatory, meaning you have plenty of time to learn this game inside and out. From item locations to enemy spawns, how to beat bosses, you name it. By the end of your 5th playthrough, you should have this game fucking downloaded. But that's not to say that the 10-star rank is easy. Obviously, it's still going to be a challenge, committing all these requirements to memory and making damn sure you don't fuck any of them up. But with proper preparation, this is entirely doable, and it's far from the most difficult thing I've ever done in a game. And so for that reason, I'm gonna put Silent Hill in the same category as Dead Space, although I am going to say that it was harder than Dead Space. And finishing off the trio of survival horror games, why don't we rank The Evil Within? This game's pretty widely considered to be one of the more difficult games out there to platinum, but I do not think this game is a 9 out of 10 difficulty. Once again, I'm sorry. The main reason people believe this platinum to be so difficult is mainly because of this trophy. You asked for it. Finish the game on a Kumu mode. And the whole gimmick with this mode is that you die in one hit from literally anything that can damage you. Now, I will say that dying in one hit is a notably more challenging aspect in this game. But unlike Dead Space 2 and Silent Hill 2's hardest trophies, in Akumu mode, you checkpoint every, few minutes. There are very few bad checkpoints in this game. For the most part, they are plentiful and very generous. At least I believe the game to be very generous with its checkpoints anyway. And that's just it. You may die in one hit, but so what? You have infinite retries. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some genuinely very frustrating moments during this playthrough. One of the most notoriously hated ones, for me personally, was the gondola ride. I fucking can't stand this part. But even still, infinite retries. Every time you die, you just climb back up on the horse and try again. And eventually you get it, and you just play through the entire game like that. There are other things that can make the game much more manageable to overcome as well, like choosing your upgrades very wisely, knowing which upgrades are more beneficial to you than others, and this all falls in line with just knowledge is power. Knowing more about the game makes it easier. Hell, even looking for all the collectibles in the game makes the game easier. But yeah, ultimately, I definitely don't think this game's a 9 out of 10. And so I will once again rank this in the not as bad as you would think category, but I did think Akumu mode was definitely harder, so I'm putting it at the top of the list. Oh, and I forgot to point out that I actually changed up a few of the tier titles because I felt like they weren't exactly depicting the ranks that I wanted to convey for each of these games. So I changed up the titles a bit to hopefully make more sense. And I went and grabbed Demon Souls and Elden Ring because I forgot to include them originally when I brought up Dark Souls. I still think they're all overrated platinums as far as trophies are concerned. But if I had to rank the FromSoft games based on genuine difficulty, it would probably look something like this based off memory. But yeah, for now, this is generally how difficult I remember them being in order. But again, this is subject to change. And speaking of Souls-likes, I think I'll actually rank Kazan. Damn, even the guy on PSNP gave Kazan an 8. Holy shit. I'm actually shocked by that. I think that's a smidge tad too high, maybe. And I think it deserves a place right here, only because it's a Souls-like, so it's challenging by default. And beating the final boss was significantly harder than anything I've done in all the games behind it. I will say, though, that when I was playing Kazan, I was smashing the game pretty good, and I feel like most of the challenge came from a suboptimal build, to be honest. I played through the vast majority of the game without exploring the best skills that my class potentially had to offer, and I only ended up discovering some amazing moves at the very ass end of the game. Not to mention, I wasn't making the most use out of armor upgrades as I could have, so I probably could have been struggling even less. And I feel like all of the issues I had were just mostly a lack of knowledge. And a playthrough of the game is probably so optimized now that I bet I could breeze through the game even easier. The final boss in Kazan is easily the most difficult thing in it, unless there was some secret boss I never found, but I doubt it. And even with the final boss, I do look back on the fight, having struggled as hard as I did, and I kind of laughed because I remember someone pointing out in the comments when I was streaming it, "Hey, Matt, you know you have this item in your inventory that gives you heals, right?" And so basically you have all your flasks, like in typical Dark Souls fashion. Those heals you always get back. But then there's consumable heals. Yeah, I was sitting on like, I don't know, 30 to 40 of those. And when that person in chat pointed it out, I just kind of said to myself, oh, fuck. I could have been making the final boss fight like 1,000 times easier on myself because I had so many heals and I just wasn't using them. Mostly because I didn't want to waste them while learning how to fight the boss. Because learning all of the final boss's moves is no joke, especially in his final phase. So yeah, I'm still not going to say it was easy, but I will say that I think it could have been a lot easier than it was for me if I were to replay the game. And so it's for that reason I feel like this placement's pretty fair. Also, I need to put it higher than the FromSoft games because there's no multiplayer. I am aware that there are NPCs you could summon in the game, although they are significantly nerfed from the NPC allies you get in the FromSoft games. They are nowhere near as good. So yeah, that feels like an okay placement for it. And honestly, I think there's only one more game I'm going to put in this tier, and I think it's going to be Crash Bandicoot Warped. Now, I know it might be sacrilege to some viewers for me to put a Crash game this low, but Crash Bandicoot Warped does have a reputation for being the easiest one, and honestly, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, as you can see, this does seem to be the general consensus. Even PowerPix basically gave it the same score. But I do remember when I was going for Platinum decently well, and when I was attempting the hardest thing in the game, which is going for the relics during the time trials, from what I can remember, there were only like 3 or 4 levels that gave me any problems, and I wasn't stuck on them for too long. And so yeah, honestly, I want to say the challenge in this game was pretty minimal. In fact, it almost doesn't even seem worth it to put it over all these other games where you struggle for such longer periods of time. I almost feel like it should be at the bottom. I don't know, it's really hard to justify that. I can't tell if people watching this are gonna riot over that placement, but this currently doesn't seem ridiculous to me, and I feel like there's an argument to be made. And I guess since I ranked one Crash game, I might as well keep going. Let's rank Crash 2. You know, this is the weird thing about Crash 2 that I just never understood, and it's that so many people make an argument for this game being harder than the first one, which I personally disagree. I think the first one was the hardest, but I've seen people many times debate it, and despite that fact, the PSNP guide only gave it a 6 out of 10, and so did the PowerPix guide. So multiple guide makers seem to be on the same page, but yet I've seen so many people argue it. So it's really interesting. Once again, the hardest thing to do in this game for Platinum is to earn 27 relics gold rank or better. This basically means you need to get a great clear time during the time trials. And I do remember going for this platinum pretty decently well. And some of the levels in this game were a genuine son of a bitch to get the gold relic. I especially hated the zero gravity ones where Crash needs a jetpack. I remember the controls for that shit being awful. And that shit was miserable. And that was just only one example of the struggle. There were several difficult levels to get the gold relic in. These games are genuinely challenging platformers that require a shit ton of trial and error in order to be genuinely good at them. And if you've ever attempted going for the platinum relics, you would know this right away. And so it's my thinking that I'm gonna put Crash Bandicoot in the beginning of decent challenge tier. I know I didn't really talk too much about Crash 2 just now, but that's because I don't want to spend too much time repeating myself. I'm mostly going to talk about Crash right now, with the first game. The guide on PSNP gave the first Crash game a 7 out of 10 difficulty. PowerPix ended up giving this game a whopping 8 out of 10, which is pretty respectable. And the reason for this once again comes down to the earn 26 relics gold or better rank during time trials. I am in full agreement that the first Crash Bandicoot game is the hardest of the trilogy, undeniably. And I think this just comes down to the fact that there are just more levels that can be extremely demanding to meet the requirements. And I was honestly shocked at how far some of these levels pushed me. Some of these levels even seemed like they were expecting perfection. And the level of optimization that I had to employ into some of these levels was actually kind of insane when I look back on it. The trial and error for this was real, and sometimes it felt like 1 or 2 mistakes was enough to prevent me from obtaining my relic. And sometimes I wouldn't even see my mistakes. I'd have to go back and be like, oh my god, what could I be doing differently? And I'd have to hard analyze my routes and come up with new strategies in order to end with a better time. And there were several levels in this game that made me have to do this. And so I was pretty damn impressed with that level of difficulty, I'll be honest. And I just feel like this was way more often the case, specifically in the first game. These issues still rang true in the second game, but I just feel like I didn't have to do it as often. And so it is for that reason that I'll be placing the first Crash game above all the others. Now, having just ranked Crash Bandicoot, in my mind, I can't help but think of Cuphead. The guide on PSNP ended up giving this game a 7 out of 10, which actually doesn't seem that unreasonable. Now, there are actually 2 trophies in this game that could be considered gatekeepers when it comes to the platinum. There's completing the game on Expert, which is the hardest difficulty in the game, and then there's the trophy for obtaining an A- rank or higher on all bosses. And I actually thought that the latter was the more difficult trophy, despite not being on the hardest difficulty. The reason for this is because you don't actually unlock expert difficulty until you complete the game at least once. And so as a trophy hunter, I wanted to go for the A ranks on my first playthrough, meaning I did so on the easier difficulty. Going for the A ranks, however, was pretty demanding, as this requires you to complete the levels in under a set amount of time. You can only get hit so often. You will have to land X amount of parries, which is sometimes difficult to do, depending on the boss and their parryable attacks, and you have to use X amount of super meter, although that's definitely the easiest requirement. In order to meet these requirements, however, I would have to learn the bosses extremely well, and this takes a lot of trial and error. You're gonna get absolutely fucked up by these boss fights before you learn how to clear them efficiently, and this is what makes the platinum so difficult, in my opinion. The reason I believe getting the A ranks to be harder than expert is because by the time you get to expert, you know the bosses like that. And when I got to expert mode, I only really struggled with like 2, maybe 3 bosses. Whereas going for the A ranks, completely different story. I struggled with almost all of them, because at that time I was still learning them. And so expert is made so much easier during your second playthrough, because you've already acquired so much practice and knowledge. Not to mention, when I was playing Cuphead, I actually made the game a lot harder on myself, because I didn't use the DLC. The DLC grants you access to some extremely overpowered stuff, like a brand new character who has some completely broken ass abilities, and playing as her just makes the game easier. And so taking into account the DLC, I will say that Cuphead should probably land underneath Crash. Next up, I'll be ranking a personal favorite of mine, Furi. The guide on PSNP gave this game an 8 out of 10 difficulty. And though I certainly understand this from a casual standpoint, I don't agree with this game being an 8. Although the main reason the guide maker believes this is probably due to this trophy. That was intense. Get an S rank in Inferior difficulty on story mode. And this is the hardest difficulty in the game. And the requirements for an S rank are that you can only die 30 times or less throughout the playthrough, you have to complete the game in under 3 hours, and you can only get hit a total of 600 times or less. And these requirements change depending on whether or not you fight the extra boss or not. Many of you probably have no idea about this game, and that's because this is an indie game and it is one of my absolute favorite indies I've ever played. This game is absolutely fantastic, and it is the perfect blend of fun meets challenge. Yes, this game can feel very difficult at times, and it's definitely going to require a lot of trial and error. But oh my god, is this game just a blast to play, and even when it's hard, it never stops being fun. And this is exactly why I praise this game so much. It's just so damn good. The gameplay feels smooth as fuck, it has a kick-ass soundtrack, and the game is a genuine challenge that never feels overbearingly difficult, just that perfect amount. I am gonna end up placing Furi underneath everything in Decent Challenge, because I did kinda slaughter this game. There were only really 2 or 3 bosses that gave me a lot of trouble, but for the most part, I kinda went beast mode. But if you guys like a challenge in video games, I highly recommend this one if you haven't played it. It is so good. Next up, let's rank everyone's favorite ninja game, and probably one you guys have been waiting for, Sekiro. Oh, so this is interesting. The guide on PSNP ended up giving this game a 7 out of 10 difficulty, while PowerPix did the exact same thing. Interesting. Now, there isn't really one trophy in particular that makes this game's platinum so difficult. It's more about the game itself. But if I had to choose a trophy, I guess I would choose Man Without Equal to defeat all bosses. It makes the most sense to call this trophy the most difficult one to get because all of the difficulty in this game comes from just playing the game. This game is designed to be very challenging, and learning the boss fights takes a lot of time, patience, and trial and error. And honestly, I did find Sekiro to be a decent challenge. The biggest learning curve for me being the parry system. Coming to this game from the other FromSoft games, the go-to mechanic I would always rely on was dodging. But dodging in Sekiro is so inferior to parrying. The game highly encourages that you learn how to parry, and if you don't, you're gonna get absolutely fucked up. And this was easily the biggest struggle for me personally. Once I did get the parry system down, however, I was able to steadily progress my way through this game, with only a handful of bosses posing a real threat. It's for that reason that I think I'm going to rank Sekiro right around here. I think Sekiro was harder than Furi, but didn't quite give me as much trouble as Cuphead or Crash Bandicoot. Mostly because this is still a FromSoft game at the end of the day, and I am very well versed with Souls-likes. I've got a lot of practice. But when it comes to platformers, I struggle with these bad boys big time. So this is just a personal preference for me. Next up is another game I believe should be somewhere in this tier, and that's gonna be Shadow Warrior. The guide maker on PSNP gave this a 9 out of 10, and that is ridiculous. This game's hard, but it's not that hard. Come on now. The main reason this game is considered to be so difficult to platinum is because of this trophy, No Ordinary Wang, to complete the game on heroic difficulty. And this mode is definitely no joke. Being the highest difficulty, enemies deal a shit ton of damage, you die very easily, you also have to start this playthrough with nothing, meaning you can't New Game Plus into it, and easily the most difficult thing about this trophy is that there are no checkpoints or saves during missions, meaning if you die at all during a mission, you have to restart it from the very beginning. Another reason this game is so difficult is that it's a relatively fast-paced FPS game, and playing through it on the hardest difficulty is genuinely demanding at times. Knowledge is power definitely comes into play, but mechanical skill is definitely required here. You have to be on your toes and play to the best of your ability, because when you have to play through a level with no checkpoints, this can get very challenging, as some of the levels towards the end of the game can span well over an hour long, and so playing through over hour-long levels without checkpoints is nerve-wracking as shit. you don't want to make a mistake. This game on the hardest difficulty was undoubtedly a nerve-wracking experience. And so it's for that reason that I think I'm probably gonna rank Shadow Warrior right around here. Now, the next game I'm gonna be talking about is going to be Hi-Fi Rush. Now, the guide over on PSNP gave this game a 7 out of 10. But it's worth mentioning that when this game was relatively new, it was an Xbox exclusive, and some Xbox gamers over there considered this game to be insanely difficult. And I honestly don't blame them. Now, the reason people believe this to be a genuinely difficult platinum is mainly because of this trophy. What a journey it was to complete the Wall of Fame in the Hideout. And unless you've played this game, you're not going to have any idea what that means. But just know that doing this requires you to earn an S rank on every level in the game, on every single difficulty setting in the game. Now, after having so much time to have learned the game, it's definitely not a 10 out of 10. But I think anybody who genuinely really struggles while playing this game is completely justified, because this game would have one of the greatest learning curves I have ever experienced. I want you to picture playing Devil May Cry, but instead of it just being the action game that you're used to, you have to cut through all of your enemies while also doing it to the beat of the music. That's right, this is a rhythm game through and through. This game had the audacity to mix action-adventure with a rhythm game. And the result is honestly one of the greatest video games I've ever played. But it's also damn hard! I went into this game with zero rhythm game experience, and learning to have to do everything to the beat of the music was brutal at times. And I cannot stress that enough. And it's for this reason that this is one of the most unique video game experiences I've ever had, hands down. Learning how to play this game and play it well took a lot of effort. And learning how to play this game well would be crucial towards earning an S rank on all difficulties. And I'm not kidding when I say it took me several hours of practice in order to be able to start consistently earning S ranks. Learning this game is no joke. I want to put Hi-Fi Rush at the very top of Decent Challenge. I think for me, a lot of it comes towards the bias of not having any rhythm game experience and having to learn that entire genre of video game in my action game was a huge obstacle to overcome for me personally. At the same time, when you get really good at it, the game feels very doable. But it's just that steep learning curve while getting into it that makes me want to put it here. And ranking it here feels right to me. Alright, I think now we've reached the point where I'm finally ready to start placing some games in the next tier. And the next game I'm going to be ranking is gonna be Devil May Cry 4. As you can see, the guide maker on PSNP has given this game an 8 out of 10 difficulty, and considering that this is a Devil May Cry game, I don't really blame them for ranking it that high. Now, there are several trophies on this list that prove to be a challenge, but I think the main trophy I'm gonna be focusing on, for all intents and purposes, is going to be Never Say Die, which is to clear all missions on Dante Must Die mode with an S ranking. This is obviously the hardest difficulty in the game. When you're looking to obtain the S ranks in all the levels, your main focuses are to do everything in your power not to die during the mission, be as stylish as possible, which means using as many different combos as you can think of, gather as many red orbs throughout the level as you can. This requirement is so stupid and annoying. As the enemies tend not to give you enough orbs, you often have to go around the level looking for them, and many of them are hidden, literally invisible. So you'll have to memorize their locations and commit them to memory, and obviously, you need to clear the level as quickly as possible. A combination of all these rules, while playing the game on the hardest difficulty, as you would expect, is extremely challenging and requires you to be very well versed with the combat in this game, familiar with all the enemy types and bosses, have strategies for dealing with all of them, which of course is different depending on the character you choose to play as. And because of how many layers there are to the complexity that goes into playing a Devil May Cry game, I can't justifiably rank this any lower. There is so much nuance and creativity to Devil May Cry games that coming up with viable strategies is not impossible, simple, but it's not easy either, especially not for the casual gamer. You often are required to play the shit out of these games in order to reach the point of being able to effectively earn the Platinum Trophy. And so it's for this reason that I'm ranking DMC4 this high. Although it's certainly not the most difficult game in the franchise, because Devil May Cry 5 is even harder. Once again, the guide maker over on PSNP has given this game an 8 out of 10 difficulty rating, and understandably so. And over on PowerPix, they gave it a fucking 10 out of 10. This might be the only game I've ever seen PowerPix rate a 10 out of 10. God damn! Without a doubt, the most difficult thing about Devil May Cry 5's trophy list is the Worthy of Legend trophy, which requires you to clear all missions with an S rank on all difficulties except Heaven or Hell. Now, I actually didn't mention this when I was talking about Devil May Cry 4, but there's a mode in Devil May Cry called Hell in Hell. And on this mode, every single enemy can kill you in one hit, no matter what attack it is. And I believe this mode is in Devil May Cry 4, but it was not required for the Platinum Trophy. Devil May Cry 5, on the other hand, this mode is required. And playing a mode in a Devil May Cry game where you die in one hit to anything, yeah, this is going to be the hardest challenge in the game, bar none. There's no debating it. When it comes to getting S ranks, things are slightly different this time around. Unlike DMC4, we don't need red orbs as a stupid fucking requirement, thank God. But pretty much everything else still applies. You really don't want to die. You want to be as stylish and use as many combos as possible, and complete the mission as quickly as you can. I'd say the #1 most frustrating thing about Devil May Cry 5 is its score system, because it makes absolutely no sense. So basically, when you're playing any mission in Devil May Cry 5, let's say you get to your first battle, and you do absolutely stupendous. You get an amazing score on your first fight, and you start the mission off strong. Well, you're gonna have to do every other fight in the level equally as well, if not better. Because as soon as you take a bad fight, and you get a score that was worse than the one you started with, this will bring down your overall rating. This game punishes you extremely hard for fucking up at all. This is stupid, because the game should only ever be effectively building on your foundation of what you've already obtained, instead of taking it away for making a mistake here and there. In my opinion, the way the score is designed in this game is idiotic, and it is extremely frustrating when going for the platinum in this game. You could be doing amazing and be so proud of yourself on one hand, and then all of a sudden it just goes in the shitter because you fucked up like once or twice. It's so shitty. It's the worst feeling in this game, and it's effectively the only thing truly holding this game back from being one of the greatest action games ever made, even though it already is. But the score system is just so bad. Anyways, I just had to rant about that, because it's awful, and you're gonna feel how bad it is if you attempt the platinum yourself. And so with all that being said, I am more than happy to place Devil May Cry in its current rank, because it's without a doubt one of the most difficult platinum trophies I've ever hunted, hands down. Now, the next game I think I want to talk about is going to be Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Now, as you can see, the guide maker on PSNP has given this game a whopping 10 out of 10 difficulty. And I'd say this is mainly because a couple trophies, this being one of the major ones, Stormbringer, complete the game on story mode on Revengeance difficulty with all S ranks. This is extremely difficult for obvious reasons, requires you to have a shitload of knowledge about the game, and the S ranks are so demanding that you're actually expected to defeat all of the boss fights without taking damage. Especially because this game is not easy to play at the highest level. Personally, I think the hardest trophy in the game, which is even worse than the one I was just talking about, is the trophy to set the highest score on every VR mission in the game. The VR missions are no joke and harbor some of the most difficult, challenging content that you can find in this game. I remember during my time with this game that it absolutely pushed me to my limits several times throughout the journey. And if you decide to attempt this platinum for yourselves, you're in for one hell of a challenge. The hardest content in this game often requires you to be able to defeat enemies expertly without getting hit and taking them down as efficiently as possible, while getting the absolute most usage out of all the tools at your disposal. And this was easily easily one of the most demanding platinum trophies I've ever gone for. Now, when it comes to ranking MGR and its exact placement, this is pretty difficult. I think I am 100% okay with putting it above Devil May Cry 4, because without question, the hardest things to do in MGR were definitely harder than the hardest things to do in Devil May Cry 4, at least in my opinion. Rating it over Devil May Cry 5, however, is where things get tricky, because you do have to learn all 3 playable characters pretty effectively in order to platinum. A good understanding of all 3 is required. So I guess that's how I'm basing it, and I do not disagree with this placement. And I think the last game that I'm going to place in this tier is gonna be Outlast 2. The guide maker over on PSNP has given this game an 8 out of 10 difficulty. More interestingly, however, PowerPix went ahead and gave this game a 7 out of 10 difficulty. The main reason for this game's platinum being so incredibly difficult is easily because of the Messiah trophy, which requires you to finish the game on insane mode without reloading the camera battery. Now, the funny thing about insane difficulty is that this is not only the hardest difficulty where you die in 1 to 2 hits from any enemy in the game, but this is also a permadeath mode, meaning if you die at all during the playthrough, you will be sent back to the very beginning of the game. And what's especially brutal about this is that even though Outlast 2 isn't that long, the cutscenes are unskippable, and they drag out the runtime of the playthrough by quite a significant amount, which really sucks. On top of being able to be so easily killed, you have to complete the entire game with only the 1 battery you are given that starts in your camera from the beginning of the game. You can't ever change it for a new one, meaning you have to find a way to conserve that battery life throughout the entire playthrough, using it as sparingly as possible and only when you absolutely need to see where you're going. This requirement is actually so demanding that it requires you to be familiar with a great deal of the game while navigating through pitch black darkness, not being able to see shit. And yes, this is pretty hard and takes quite a long time in order to learn this stuff. I spent many hours practicing all the sections, making sure I could get them down consistently. And this took a lot of effort. Now, funny enough, there's actually going to be a lot of people out there who don't agree with Outlast 2 being all that difficult, but I can guarantee you that anybody who thinks Outlast 2 is easy only thinks that because they watched some dickhead on YouTube's playthrough and they played the game alongside them while watching them, just copying everything they did. And I have had multiple people show up in my live streams saying, "Oh, Matt, I attempted the Messiah run and I got it in like my 2nd or 3rd try." And I'm just like, bullshit! You only got it because you were copying all the strategies of someone else. And I mean, it's fine if you want to do that. Okay, I'm not judging. But I attempted this game's platinum learning all of the strategies completely on my own and creating my own route. And with this experience came several hours of dying over and over and having to rewatch all of the cutscenes many times. I trial and errored that shit, because I wanted to do the run completely legit, as the challenge intended. And that's not to take away from the achievement of anybody who did it the easy way, but I'm just saying, I mean, if you're watching someone else's successful run, your run's gonna be a lot easier. There's no debating it. So not everyone had the same degree of challenge that I did, as well as anyone else who did it legit. But that being said, I consider this game to have been one of the most difficult platinum trophies I've ever attempted. Personally, I'm okay with placing Outlast at the bottom of genuinely difficult tier, as I think all of the games above it are a bit more mechanically demanding. But yeah, Outlast 2 was no goddamn joke. And I think it is now time for me to finally start ranking the games I consider to be in the highest tier of peak difficulty on my tier list. And the first game I'm gonna throw up there is Street Fighter V. The guide maker over on PSNP gave this game a 10 out of 10 difficulty rating. And although it's very hard for me to consider any of the games I've played to be a 10 out of 10, to be honest, I do not blame anybody for ranking this game that high. The reason for this game's platinum trophy being so incredibly difficult to obtain is, in my opinion, because of this trophy. Let's fight someone strong to rank up all the way to Gold League during ranked matches. Oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad, I might hear you say. And you'd be wrong! It is bad! Because Street Fighter V is a highly competitive online fighting game, where you are fighting other actual human beings. And although I can't speak for the current state of the online as of right now, because I haven't played this game in quite some time at this point, but I have no doubt there are still people who play. And back when I was going for the Platinum Trophy, this was absolutely the case. There were no shortage of matches, and the online was still very vibrant and active within the community. That being said, it wasn't difficult to find matches, and when I did, they were hard. Ball-bustingly difficult. Especially because when I went for Platinum, Street Fighter V was at the end of its lifespan, meaning almost everyone who played the game had easy access to information on any and all characters, learning combos, tricks of the trade, different gameplay strategies, you name it. Getting to gold rank may not seem like that big of a deal for some, but for me, this was easily one of the most difficult things I have ever achieved in a video game. Playing against other people and trying to rank up was such a harsh reality check, where I struggled with several moments of self-doubt, thinking I could never pull it off, and I wanted to quit many times. In fact, I did. But I kept coming back, and I stuck with it. And that's why it is easily one of my most proudest achievements. Getting to gold rank may be easy for some, but I don't care who you are. Competitive fighting games are not easy for anybody. Most people don't play fighting games, let alone long enough to get actually good at them. Fighting games are and always have been a niche genre in the gaming community. There are many people who don't play them, and especially because so many fighting games are so difficult to get good at and require a shit ton of time investment and a great deal of effort from the player. Most people aren't willing to commit to that, and understandably so. And it's because of all these reasons that I don't care who you are, getting the Platinum Trophy in this game is fucking impressive. That's just how I view fighting games. They are no joke. And so it's for all those reasons I listed that I have to put Street Fighter V among the highest echelon of games that I have conquered, because pulling that off took just about everything out of me. And I suppose now it's time that I finally get talking about the games I'm sure many of you have been waiting for, Ninja Gaiden. I've played 3 Ninja Gaiden games in the Master Collection, and so I'm gonna start with talking about the first Ninja Gaiden Sigma. The guide maker over on PSNP gave this game a whopping 9 out of 10 difficulty, and you know what? I'm not even gonna argue with you. And the reason this game's Platinum Trophy is considered so difficult is easily because of this trophy right here, to get a Master Ninja rank on all chapters on Master Ninja difficulty. Now, Ninja Gaiden for me was a very eye-opening experience the first time I played it. I was coming into this series long after Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and all the FromSoft games that everybody praises for being so incredibly difficult. I'm gonna tell you right now, you don't know shit about difficulty till you play Ninja Gaiden. And I guarantee you that Ninja Gaiden is harder than most games you have ever seen before. Ninja Gaiden is an action game, just like Devil May Cry. But I'm not kidding when I say these are the fastest paced action games I have ever played. And they make Devil May Cry seem slow and sluggish by comparison. These games demand the player to be lightning fast with incredibly high reflexes, and they require you to reach an incredibly high skill ceiling. And learning how to efficiently fight all the enemies and boss fights in any of these games is quite literally demanded of you. Ninja Gaiden will make you realize just how little you've experienced when it comes to a great challenge. And I have never played a single video game quite like these games. And the combat may be so insanely difficult, but it's for the most part also extremely well designed. And it's some of the best combat I've ever experienced in a game. So it at least has that going for it. Even though it's hard, it is so incredibly fun to learn, and when you do, it is extremely rewarding. But the funny thing about every single Ninja Gaiden game is that eventually the fun stops, as far as going for the Platinum Trophy is concerned. And you will most likely reach a point where you genuinely want to give up. This game, unfortunately, has one of the worst design missions I've ever seen in a game, where you have to fight 2 bosses at the same time in this small confined space, playing as a shittier character, and beating them was just so demanding that this one mission single-handedly gate-kept me on the Platinum Trophy. And I spent hours, yes hours, trying to clear this mission. And every Ninja Gaiden game is famous for having a moment like this, where you hit a wall and you seriously doubt if you could even do it. And yes, it's for that reason that I'm going to go ahead and rank Ninja Gaiden at the very top, at least for now. Next, let's go ahead and talk about Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. The guide maker over on PSNP gave this game a 10 out of 10 difficulty. Absolutely disagree with that. This game once again requires you to do the absolute hardest things to do in the game on the hardest difficulty, and of course this is far from easy. But I will say that in order to be able to platinum the first game, I'm not saying you need to be among the greatest Ninja Gaiden players of all time in order to accomplish this, but you have to come pretty damn close. And peak skill is almost always expected of you in these games. That being said, having cleared Ninja Gaiden 1, all of that experience thankfully carries over into the second game, and there's not that much of a learning curve. Especially if you're playing the games back to back, you bring all that skill with you straight into the next game. And it's for that reason that Ninja Gaiden 2 was, in my opinion, the easier platinum. Some people don't agree with this, but I actually had an easier time with Ninja Gaiden 2. Now don't get me wrong, Ninja Gaiden 2 still has its incredibly difficult moments, and many of them. It was much easier for me to be able to adapt to all of the challenges the second game had to offer. But again, that's only because the first game was so incredibly demanding. And so it's for that reason that I am actually going to place Ninja Gaiden 2 at the bottom of this tier. Now Ninja Gaiden 3, on the other hand, not so much. The guide maker over on PSNP gave Ninja Gaiden 3 an 8 out of 10, and I found that to be interesting, because I really genuinely struggled with this one. The majority of my struggle mainly came from this trophy, Ultimate, to clear 3 Ultimate Ninja Trials. Now 3 missions may sound like nothing, but these missions provide the most difficult content in the entire game, hands down. Not to mention Ninja Gaiden 3 still requires you to go through the entire game on the hardest difficulty, exactly the same as before. The only way you can conceivably get through these games is if you have a fair degree of mastery over them. Once again, it is expected of you in these games. They're just that difficult. And Ninja Gaiden 3 made an effort to push the envelope, because they decided to reinvent the combat system and add brand new mechanics. And learning the complexity of these mechanics wasn't all that easy, and reaching that mastery level took quite a lot of time and trial and error. I haven't said this until now, but every single Ninja Gaiden will easily make you invest over 100 hours. Easily. In all 3 games. You have to play the shit out of them and get really good. That being said, the most difficult missions in Ninja Gaiden 3 were unbelievably challenging. Now, I don't think any of them were quite as hard as the most difficult mission in the first game, but they came pretty close. And it's for that reason that I'm actually going to rank Ninja Gaiden 3 just below the first game, while also being above the second game, because I definitely struggled noticeably more with the third game in the trilogy. And speaking of incredibly difficult games, it's time for the last game that I'm going to place in the peak difficulty tier, and that's gonna be I Am Bread. Over on PSNP, I Am Bread has understandably been given a 9 out of 10 difficulty rating. There are actually multiple trophies that add to making this game being such a difficult platinum trophy overall, and that is because there are 5 different playable breads, all of which require you to get an A++ rank on each and every one of the different breads levels. And all of these breads play incredibly different from each other. I Am Bread is a game that feels like it was intentionally designed to frustrate the player, because it has some of the most awkward controls you will ever experience in a video game, and they are extremely difficult to master. Getting genuinely good at playing I Am Bread is a feat that any and all who manage to do it should be proud of, because this is one of the most awkward video games I've ever played. I Am Bread has an incredibly high skill ceiling, although it feels like the game does very little to help the player actually achieve this. Compare it to Ninja Gaiden, where I feel like the better you get at the game, the more accomplished you feel, and your progression just goes forward. You only continue to be better the more time you invest in the game. And I suppose the same could be true about I Am Bread, but in a very different way. Because like I said, there are 5 different breads, all with unique control schemes, and all of them just as equally frustrating as the last in order to master. In I Am Bread, it feels like when you finally start getting the hang of one of the breads, and you feel good enough to earn high ranks, once you achieve this, the game says, Alright, fuck you. Learn a completely new bread with brand new physics and controls. Good luck! And you have to go through this 5 fucking times in this game. It's for that reason that I actually hold this game in a completely different regard than Ninja Gaiden. That's why I consider I Am Bread to be so uniquely frustrating, is basically feeling like you have to relearn an entirely new game every time you switch breads. You never have that sense of comfort and security. You always feel like your limits need to be pushed in order for you to see progress. And it is an absolutely miserable fucking feeling. The I Am Bread journey never feels like it's going downhill. It's always an uphill battle. The game never feels like it's getting any easier, because there's always this incredibly difficult new learning curve needing to be mastered. And doing this was, without question, one of the most difficult things I have ever attempted in a video game. And it's for that reason that I am somewhat confidently placing I Am Bread in the #1 spot. And I think that I can confidently say is my tier list. Now, the first thing I want to say that is very important to keep in mind is that, again, this is a tier list, and tier lists are purely based off of one's opinion. I'm not going out here saying that this tier list is law, and that this is how everyone needs to look at it. I'm sure I'm gonna have some people disagreeing with some of the placements on here. But I don't know, I'm looking at this and I'm pretty happy with it. But feel free to discuss anything you disagree with in the comments. I'm sure it'll make for some interesting conversation. Anyways, that was my tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you haven't already, feel free to check out any of the videos I've made for many of these games here on my tier list, if one of them interests you, and if you haven't seen them already.